Hey man, grab a horn of mead or a strong coffee, whatever your poison is, and settle in. You want the creation myth, but with the blood, the iron, and the raw battlefield grit left in?
Hollywood loves to make Odin look like this wise, serene, grandfatherly figure, like a cosmic Santa Claus in gold armor. But the real Norsemen? They knew the truth. Odin is the Valfr, the father of the slain. He's a god of ecstasy, poetry, and absolute, unforgiving warfare. To the Vikings, the creation of the universe wasn't some peaceful, divine spoken word. It was a cosmic murder. It was the first and most brutal war in existence. Let's wind the clock back to before there was an earth to walk on, before the stars were pinned to the sky, before time itself even had a name. In the beginning, there was nothing but Ginnungagap. That's the yawning void. Just a vast, silent, terrifying abyss of absolute emptiness. But emptiness doesn't stay empty forever. To the far north of this void, a realm of pure, biting malice formed. Niflheim, a world of ice, freezing mist, and venomous rivers that froze solid as they cascaded into the abyss. To the far south, its polar opposite ignited. Muspelheim, a roaring, blinding hellscape of pure fire, molten rock, and soot, ruled by a primordial entity named Surt, who just sits there glowing, waiting for the end of the world. For eons, these two cosmic forces, unstoppable fire and unyielding ice, drifted toward each other across the void. And right there, in the middle of Ginnungagap, the heat of Muspelheim kissed the frost of Niflheim. The ice began to melt, and from those dripping drops of venomous, chaotic moisture, life sparked. But it wasn't a noble god. It was a monster. Out of the melting frost rose Ymir. Ymir was the first of the Jotnar, the primordial earth giants. He wasn't just big. He was the size of a continent, a walking manifestation of raw, chaotic nature. As Ymir slept, he sweated from his left armpit, and from that sweat, a male and a female giant were born. From his feet, another multi-headed monster was conceived. The giants were multiplying, filling the void with raw, chaotic entropy. At the same time, the melting ice revealed another being. Buri, the ancestor of the gods, licked free from the salt ice by a primeval cosmic cow named Aumbla. Buri had a son named Bor, and Bor took a giantess named Bestla as his wife. And that is where our main man comes in. Bor and Bestla had 3 sons, Vili, Ve, and Odin. Now, imagine growing up as these 3 young, powerful brothers in a void dominated by massive, chaotic, lawless giants. Ymir and his brood didn't want order. They didn't want beauty, or laws, or halls, or poetry. They were the personification of the wild, destructive, untamed universe. Odin looked around at the infinite emptiness and the towering, oppressive shadows of the giants, and he felt a burning fire in his blood. He realized a fundamental truth that would define the entire Viking worldview. Order cannot coexist with chaos. If you want to build something lasting, you have to fight for it. You have to destroy the old world to birth the new. The brothers didn't hold a council. They didn't try to negotiate a peace treaty. They drew their weapons. The battle that followed is the stuff of cosmic nightmares. Imagine 3 young gods, radiating divine light, throwing themselves at a mountain-sized titan of ice and venom. The sagas don't give us the blow-by-blow, but you can bet the fabric of reality tore open. Ymir's fists could crush tectonic plates that didn't even exist yet. His breath was a blizzard of absolute zero. But Odin was already mastering the art of the battlefield, the strategy, the relentless focus, the fury of the berserker. Vili and Ve fought by his side, hacking at the giant's colossal limbs, dodging boulders of frozen venom. driving the monster back into the center of the yawning void. With a final, earth-shattering strike, the three brothers brought Ymir down. Odin drove his weapon into the giant's heart. And that's when the horror and the true creation began. When Ymir died, the wound didn't just bleed. It exploded. A localized, apocalyptic deluge of dark, freezing blood erupted from the giant's corpse. It was a crimson tidal wave so massive, so overwhelming, that it washed across Ginnungagap, drowning almost the entire race of giants that Ymir had sweat into existence. Imagine an entire ecology of titanic monsters being swept away and suffocated by the blood of their own father. Only one giant, Ymir, and his wife managed to scramble onto a hollowed-out tree trunk, riding the gory waves to safety in a distant, frozen corner of the void. They survived, nursing a bitter, generational hatred for Odin and his kin, a hatred that would eventually burn the world down at Ragnarok. But Odin didn't care about the survivors. He stood in the quiet aftermath of the slaughter, drenched in giant's blood, looking at the massive, steaming corpse of Ymir floating in the void. He looked at his brothers, wiped the gore from his face, and said, "All right, now we build." So, Odin, Vili, and Ve are standing knee-deep in a boiling sea of gore right in the center of the void, and floating in front of them is a corpse the size of multiple continents. To a modern eye, this would look like a scene straight out of a cosmic horror movie. But to the Norse, this was an act of pure, sober pragmatism. They didn't have bricks, they didn't have cement, and they didn't have timber. They only had dead Ymir. So, the brothers rolled up their sleeves and went to work like expert hunters skinning a massive kill. First, they took his flesh. They hacked it away in colossal, mountain-sized slabs and hurled it into the depths of Ginnungagap, packing it down tightly until it became solid. That is how dry land was born. The dirt beneath your boots right now? According to the Vikings, that's literally the muscle and decay of a primordial monster. Because it was raw and malleable, the gods shaped it, carving out valleys, lowlands, and plains. But a flat earth lacked teeth, and that's where Ymir's bones came into play. The brothers shattered his massive skeleton into pieces. They drove his colossal shin bones, ribs, and joints deep into the flesh, propping it up to create majestic, jagged ridges. That's how mountains were born. When a Viking looked up at the snow-capped, unforgiving peaks of the Norwegian fjords, he didn't just see a pretty landscape. He saw the splintered skeleton of a primeval titan. And if you've ever tripped over a sharp rock or a jagged boulder on a hike, congratulations. In the Norse mindset, those were Ymir's teeth and broken jaw splinters, scattered across the earth by the gods. Every hidden reef that ever ripped open the wooden hull of a Viking longship once belonged to the chewing apparatus of the first giant. Then came the blood. There was so much of it that it threatened to wash away everything they had just built. So, Odin channeled the torrents. They gathered this salty, venomous fluid and corralled it into a massive ring surrounding the newly formed land, creating the world ocean. They let the smaller streams of blood leak through the gashes in his flesh, creating rivers, lakes, and hidden springs. When a Viking warrior set sail and felt his ship being tossed by a violent storm, he knew he was riding on the churning, angry blood of his god's greatest enemy. But the hardest part was the sky. The brothers hoisted up Ymir's massive, heavy skull. Imagine the sheer, divine muscle required to engineer a dome out of bone. They flung it high into the air and stretched it across the horizon, creating the vault of heaven. To keep this giant skull from crashing down and crushing everything underneath, Odin stationed 4 of the strongest dwarfs to hold it up by its 4 corners. Their names were Austri, East, Vestri, West, Nordri, North, and Sudri, south. It's from their names that we still get our cardinal directions today. However, the inside of that skull was pitch black and suffocating. So, Odin looked over at neighboring Muspelheim, the realm of pure fire, and began catching flying sparks and glowing embers with his bare hands. He hurled them into the interior of Ymir's skull, pinning them to the bone to create the stars. The two largest chunks of fire were placed in celestial wagons to become the sun and the moon. And you want to know what they did with Ymir's brains? This is my absolute favorite detail. They just threw them up into the air beneath the skull. The brain matter exploded into thousands of soft, gray, wet fragments. The Norse believed that the clouds in the sky were Ymir's brains, still drifting aimlessly over the world. So, when you have a gloomy, gray, overcast day, it's just the thoughts of a dead giant blocking out your sun. Now, you'd think the world was finished. But Odin knew better. He knew the order they had forced upon the universe was incredibly fragile. Out on the fringes of the earth, across the wild oceans in a frozen wasteland called Jotunheim, the surviving giants were already sharpening their stone axes, nursing a generational blood feud. They wanted vengeance for their father. Security required walls. So, Odin and his brothers took Ymir's eyelashes. They wove them together to create a massive, impenetrable fortification around the central portion of the earth. This protected citadel, safe from the chaotic wilds of the outer realms, they named Midgard, the Middle Yard, the realm of men. A fortress where chaos couldn't easily reach those who were weaker than the gods. We left off with Midgard built. This massive, secure cosmic ring shielded by a dead titan's eyelashes. It had mountains, oceans, and stars, but it was dead quiet. It was like a beautifully crafted theater stage with no actors. One day, Odin and his brothers, Vili and Vi, were walking along the rocky, salt-sprayed shoreline of this brand-new world. The waves were crashing violently against the stone, tossing up foam and beach debris. As they walked, they stumbled upon two logs that had drifted across the world ocean and washed up onto the shore. One was a sturdy piece of ash wood, and the other was a graceful piece of elm. To you and me, it's just driftwood. But Odin didn't just see dead wood. He saw potential. He saw a canvas. The three gods knelt in the wet sand, pulled out their blades, and began to carve. They shaped the ash into a man and the elm into a woman. But they were still just wooden statues, cold, lifeless, and stiff. So, the brothers decided to share their own divine essence to ignite these creations. Odin stepped forward first. He leaned down and blew his breath into their wooden mouths. He didn't just give them oxygen. He gave them Ond, the spirit, the soul, the spark of life itself. Vili went next. He gave them Ar, wit, intelligence, emotion, and most importantly, will. The driving ambition to change their environment. Ve touched their faces, giving them shape, speech, hearing, and sight, so they could look out at the world and actually comprehend it. They named the man Asker, Ash, and the woman Embla, Elm. They were the very first humans, the ancestors of all of us. Odin clothed them, gave them Midgard as their home, and watched them take their first steps. But remember what you asked for? You wanted the battles. You wanted the grit. And Odin? He didn't create humanity to just sit around picking daisies in a peaceful garden. That's a completely different mythology, my friend. Odin created humans because he needed them to be survivors. He knew the universe was a hostile, terrifying place, and he wanted to see what his new creations were made of. So he didn't coddle them. He gave them a brutal, immediate trial by fire. The gods withdrew, leaving Asker and Embla alone on the harsh, windswept coast of Midgard. And almost immediately, the walls of Midgard were tested. Deep from the shadows of the outer frozen wastes of Jotunheim, the scouts of the frost giants, the Jotnar, crept in. They had bypassed the outer walls, driven by that ancient, boiling hatred for anything Odin had created. Imagine being the first man and woman. You've only been alive for a few days. You don't have iron weapons yet. You don't have armor. You barely understand how your own lungs work. And suddenly, out of the freezing northern mist, these towering, blue-skinned monsters emerge, wielding clubs made of solid ice and jagged stone, howling for your blood. This was the first human battle. It wasn't a glorious clash of armies with banners flying. It was a desperate, primal struggle for survival. Asker didn't run. That ashwood inside his soul made him stubborn, unyielding. He grabbed a heavy, waterlogged branch from the beach, using the very wood he was made of, and stood between the monsters and Embla. Embla, with the quick wit given by Vili, didn't panic. She scooped up sharp, jagged flint stones, those broken teeth of Ymir, and began hurling them with lethal precision. They fought like cornered animals. Asker was smashed into the rocks, his skin torn, bleeding the very first drops of human blood onto the soil of Midgard. But the spark of Odin was burning in his veins. He felt the furor, the primal rage that would later define the Viking berserkers. He drove forward, swinging his wooden club, shattering the knee of a frost giant, while Embla blinded another with a sharp stone. They were bleeding, broken, and utterly outmatched, but they refused to yield. They stood ground, fighting tooth and nail, turning the peaceful beach into a gory wrestling ring. Up in the heavens, standing on his high throne Hlidskjaf, Odin looked down through the clouds. He watched the first human blood mix with the sand. He watched Asker spit out a broken tooth and raise his club again. He watched Embla stand back to back with her mate, ready to die fighting. And Odin smiled. He didn't send a lightning bolt to save them. He didn't need to. Seeing their unyielding spirit, the remaining frost giants, unnerved by the sheer, feral ferocity of these tiny wooden creatures, retreated back into the freezing fog. Asker and Embla had won their first war. They had baptized Midgard in their own blood and proved they had the right to exist. Odin turned to his brothers and realized a dark, heavy truth. These humans possess the spark. They will fight, they will bleed, and they will grow strong. And one day, I am going to need every single one of them. Everything I've told you so far, the butchering of Ymir, the earth made of flesh, the clouds made of brains, and Asker and Embla bleeding onto the sand, wasn't just a bedtime story to the Vikings. It was their reality. It shaped every single choice they made, from the moment they woke up in their smoky longhouses to the moment they drew their final, rattling breath on a foreign battlefield. You see, because the Norsemen believed the very world was birthed from violence, they accepted that life was fundamentally a struggle. They didn't view peace as the natural state of things. Peace was just the quiet pause between storms. When a Viking went out to clear a field in Scandinavia, he was wrestling with Ymir's bones. The soil was rocky, stubborn, and unforgiving. To survive, you had to be just as tough as the earth. It made them hard. It made them practical. But it also gave them a terrifyingly beautiful worldview when it came to warfare. Hollywood loves to show Vikings as mindless brutes who just wanted to murder everything in sight. But that completely misses the point. They didn't fight because they were mindless. They fought because they believed that courage in the face of death was the ultimate cosmic currency. Remember what Odin said when he watched the first humans fight the frost giants? One day, I am going to need every single one of them. The Vikings knew about Ragnarok, the doom of the gods. They knew that a day was coming when the world ocean would boil, the stars would fall from Ymir's skull, and the great wolf Fenrir would break his chains to swallow the sun. On that day, Odin would lead the gods into a final, losing battle against the forces of chaos. And Odin needed an army. This army was the Einherjar, the elite ghost warriors who dwelt in Valhalla, Odin's grand, shield-roofed hall in Asgard. But here's the catch. You couldn't get into Valhalla by dying of old age or sickness or peacefully in your sleep. The Norse called that stradowie, straw death, dying in a bed of straw. To them, that was a tragedy. If you died peacefully, your soul went down to Helheim, a cold, dreary, misty underworld ruled by the goddess Hel. It wasn't necessarily a place of torture, but it was boring. It was fading away into nothingness. To get into Valhalla, you had to die in battle. You had to die with a weapon in your hand and courage in your heart. Because of this, the battlefield wasn't a place of despair. It was an interview for the ultimate promotion. When a Viking shield wall clashed with an English army, and the spears started flying and the iron started biting into bone, a warrior didn't panic. He looked up at the sky. He believed that invisible, terrifying warrior goddesses called Valkyries, the choosers of the slain, were riding through the clouds on spectral horses, watching the carnage. They were looking for the bravest, the fiercest, the ones who refused to yield even when they were outnumbered, just like Asker and Embla on the beach. If a Valkyrie chose you, it meant a sword was going to find your throat. But as you fell into the bloody mud, breathing your last, you wouldn't weep. You would smile, because you knew that your spirit was about to be carried up across the Bifrost Bridge, straight into the halls of the Allfather. In Valhalla, you would feast on roasted boar that regenerated every night. You would drink endless mead flowing from the udders of a cosmic goat, and every single day, you would march out onto the plains of Asgard and fight each other to the death for practice, only to be healed at sunset so you could drink again. You were training for the end of the world. That is why the Vikings sailed across the terrifying, unpredictable North Sea in open wooden boats. That is why they raided monasteries, fought emperors, and colonized frozen islands. They weren't afraid of dying, because their entire mythology taught them that the world was created through a glorious, bloody conquest, and it would end in one. To live a good life meant to play your part in that eternal story. So, next time you look up at a gray, cloudy sky, remember Ymir's brains. Next time you see a rugged mountain peak, remember his bones. And next time you face a massive challenge in your own life, remember the spark that Odin blew into the wood on that beach. Stand your ground, don't drop your club, and fight like the Allfather is watching.
And that, my friend, is the saga of how the Norse world was born, how it was baptized in blood, and how it forged the fiercest warriors the world has ever seen. Thanks for sitting by the fire with me.